Hello and welcome everyone. Here today I'm with Victor Lyons, who is an e-learning specialist and also has delivered several psychotherapy projects in the UK, in India and the US, and currently lives in Spain. Thanks so much for being with us today, Victor.
Thank you.
My name's Emma Lees. I'm a volunteer staff writer with Liluye, who work with human and sex trafficking organisations. And we are currently doing a series of interviews with experts and specialists and organisations across the globe to understand more about the issues around trafficking and how we can work together to try and eradicate trafficking for the future and support those who have been trafficked also. Here today, Victor is going to be talking to us about some of the work he's done in the psychotherapeutic field, and particularly around PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and training that he offers to individuals and organisations. So if I could just start firstly off, Victor, to ask you, what exactly is PTSD?
It's a condition which has a collection of symptoms, and the main symptoms are, you don't have to have all of these symptoms, but most of them. The main symptoms are sleep disturbance, like nightmares or flashbacks. So you're walking down the street and suddenly you're back in the jungle where you used to be a soldier or something. And then there's avoidance, there's phobias, there's like streets you can't go down or places you can't go down or things you don't want to talk about. And then there's things that you do want to talk about, but you can't because you just get too emotional. So it's those kind of things. And originally it was a condition that was identified with people who'd been in the war. So people came back from World War I, and there was obviously something seriously wrong with them, and it was called shell shock. But nowadays, we can look at it and say, well, it's not just military stuff. It's not just bombs. There's all sorts of things that can cause this. You get a high rate of it with firemen, with policemen, anybody who has to attend a traumatic incident, even though they don't suffer it from themselves, they can get traumatized. And I personally find that a lot of people who have trouble with bereavements and don't recover from them are exhibiting the same symptoms.
So how did you first get involved in PTSD training itself?
Well, when I was 8, I was having a discussion with my best friend Lionel, and we were trying to work out what we were going to do. And he said, I'm going to be a brain surgeon. And I said, I'm going to be a psychiatrist. And the reason I said psychiatrist is I came from a family, or two families, my mother's family, my father's family, of extraordinary people with amazing personalities. What made people different, and why were some of them completely bonkers, and why were some of them very sane? And it became an obsession to the point where I presumed the only way I was going to learn about this was to actually do psychiatry. But to do psychiatry, you had to go to medical school. And if you went to medical school, where I went in Bristol, the first thing you did was start cutting up bodies. We started at the neck and worked downwards. And I'm sitting there after 2 months thinking, this isn't helping me understand how people think, how people behave. So I switched to psychology. The psychology realm in those days, because I'm quite old now, it was all about objective measurements. It was like, how does somebody behave? Let's observe them. And it wasn't about how do people think.
Psychology today seems to have evolved into so many different areas now. And obviously PTSD training is something that's relatively new, I would have thought. Is that the case?
Yeah. Yes, you're absolutely right. Psychology has devolved into different segments, if you like. And the one obviously we're talking about here is clinical psychology. And so the first obsession is always with diagnosis, which is great, because if you don't diagnose what's going on, you don't know how to address it. So yes, there are tests for PTSD, but they're not used often enough, unfortunately. What happened with me was that my friend and colleague was doing her PhD, and her thesis was that if we use this treatment called TIR, traumatic incident reduction, on crime victims who have PTSD, they will get better. And would you like to join in and help me get my PhD? And I said, certainly. So what we did is we set up shop in a victim support organisation in South London where they deal with crime victims. So the police would send over the traumatised crime victims. And what the police got out of it was the fact that their witnesses, when they went on the stand in subsequent trials, wouldn't fall apart because they were too traumatised to testify. Mm-hmm. What we got out of it was subjects that we could use this treatment method on. And our results were absolutely extraordinary. 89% of all the PTSD crime cases we came across after we attended to them, given them sessions, no longer had PTSD.
Wow, 89%, that's phenomenal.
What I come across this group of psychologists and psychiatrists and non-psychologists, and they devised this technique for reducing that trauma, in fact, eliminating it. And that's what they call TIR, traumatic incident reduction. And it worked. And so we started using it in this, in victim support in South London, and it worked. And it worked on, it didn't matter what type of victim they were, whether they were a crime victim or whatever. If they had PTSD, as I said, 89% were effectively cured. Now, with TIR, if I can't cure somebody's PTSD, I feel I failed, quite simply. It's not me, it's the technique. The technique works. Fascinating.
So obviously that makes it a lot easier for you to be able to replicate the kind of work that you're doing to extend the success that you have, which is fantastic.
Exactly.
So does it work? Is it like a series of questions? Is it more like a version of talk therapy, or is it a variety of different things?
The assumption is that if you've been in a trauma, there is a video recording in your head of that trauma. And the problem is not that you don't have that recording, but the problem is you can't access that recording. So the joy of TIR is we go in and we know how to access that recording, and we get you to go in and look at that video until you get to the end. And then you tell us what happened. So you relate your experience to us. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. And as we do it, gradually, two things can happen. Either the video in your head shrinks and gets fades and gets thinner and eventually disappears. Or the other thing that can happen is it gets heavier and more solid, and then we know there is an earlier similar incident behind it. So we go to the earlier similar incident, and quite often you'll have a chain of incidents which are similar, and when you get to the bottom one, that disappears, and then the trauma's gone.
So they all kind of fall over like a stack of row of dominoes kind of effect.
Exactly. And also, we don't do 50-minute hours or anything silly. We don't say, right, your time's up, my next client's here. You go on until the picture has disappeared. Now, that can take half an hour. It can take 5 hours. The two longest sessions I did, one was with somebody who'd been in a terrorist incident in Kabul. So that took nearly 5 hours. But usually they take 1 hour, 2 hours, things like that.
So it's usually just one session. You just stay for as long as you need to, and then that's it, kind of thing. Wow.
Exactly. For that trauma. I mean, typically people will come in, we'll have 10 traumas or 15 traumas. The most common cause of trauma generally is actually deaths of people you're close to. That seems to cause more than anything. And if we treat it like it's PTSD with this technique, and it makes a huge difference.
And do you ever have to do any follow-up work afterwards, or yeah?
Oh yeah. Unlike conventional clinical psychology, where it's once a week for 50 minutes, I try and get them back the next day or the day after. So every 2 days probably is about, for me, optimum. And we keep going. We have a list of traumas. That's what we've done a history, an interview at the beginning, and said, all right, let's go through everything in your life that could possibly have been traumatic. You go through the list until they say, wow, that's it, finish, I'm done. Thank you, goodbye. The next step for me after that was, and my colleagues, was, this is great, but there's only a handful of us. Now what do we do? And the answer was, let's train lots of people. Now I understand that the extent of trafficking victims and refugees. 3 of my grandparents were refugees, so I feel this quite strongly. You know, they escaped ethnic cleansing in Eastern Europe. So the whole refugee trauma thing is kind of important to me. And trafficking victims are really a specific worst case of that. You know, they didn't escape somewhere. Or went by the time, you know, they eventually they escape, but they go through hell before they escape.
Exactly, and it can take many years, can't it, to actually escape their situation. I know you've more recently started working with Liluye and trafficking victims. What kind of experiences have you had so far with training PTSD with some of the organisations we work with?
Yeah, what I hadn't come across was the extent of the trauma with trafficking cases. They're at the extreme end. People who've been raped multiple times over a short period of time. So what I'm doing now is training people who work with these people. What I want to do is build up an organization of trainers who go out and train others. I did this with literacy campaigns in India, where I wrote a literacy program and we got a small team and we trained some people and they trained other people. And we ended up training about 1,000 people altogether who went off and set up literacy centers around India. So I want to I'm trying to follow a similar model. I've just started on this route. We've done the first training session. It's not that difficult and it does get results. And then, and we're talking about areas where there is no mental health infrastructure. If you're traumatized in the middle of these parts of Africa or India where we're dealing with, you can't go to the clinical psychologist or the therapist and get sessions, or even if you did, you couldn't afford them. So I'm working in an area where mental health is a vacuum. So this is a triage activity. This is like, okay, let's see the most traumatized people and let's fix them up as quickly as possible and see where we are.
Fantastic. So you've already trained one organisation. You've got another organisation this weekend that you'll be training at.
Well, I train individuals from organisations. So the first cohort was people from World Pulse. The next cohort is also people from World Pulse, but they have their own organisations as well.
Okay, fantastic. And typically, how long does the training last?
We've got to the point where we have an app, a web application, which has the theory on it that they can do in their own time online before we actually start. Then we do a weekend of role plays and exercises. It's pure practical. And practice. So there's 4 hours on the Saturday and 4 hours on the Sunday. And then after that, I deal with them individually and coach them as they take on their clients. And
the 89% of having success from that is across all cases. It's for everything. So it's obviously worth people undertaking this training and going through the process. And obviously you're working with Liluye with us to try and encourage organisations to take part in this training. I know, like you said, we just recently started doing this. And we're looking at working with as many partner organisations as we possibly can to help support them through this training. And we obviously ask anyone that is interested in taking part to get in touch with us. We'll have the details of our blog and how to get in touch here.
We're going to be putting in funding proposals to grant aid to donors. But I do have colleagues around the world who are old friends who do this as well in different countries. So I'm going to press gang them into helping me as and when I need it.
Fantastic.
Specifically on this project, the website is called SessionWise.org. SessionWise, WISE.org. And there's a sort of introduction to what we're doing. And So they've got a permanent login to the app. Whenever they need to refresh themselves, they can go and use it. And also they can use it as a prompt while they're giving a session. They can have it on their laptop, so it tells them what to do next. An aid memoir, if you like. So that's the app has several purposes. SessionWise.org.
Oh, fantastic. And can I ask how much it costs for an individual to go through this training?
At the moment, we don't charge. We ask for donations of €100 if you can afford it. Now, we have people in remote areas of South Asia or West Africa or whatever who just cannot afford that because they live in totally different economies. So we're not insistent at all. If you can afford it, we're very grateful for the money. But that's only a short-term thing. In the long term, we hope to get money from donors, from grant aid foundations to fund this. So they shouldn't. I don't want there to be any charge to the end user. I don't want somebody who's got full-blown PTSD having to worry about pay me or pay any of our trainers. That's got to stop.
So obviously the request for today is obviously if you're an organisation or an individual that would like to take part in this training, please do get in touch with us and we can discuss about partnerships and how we can work together to try and maximise the rollout of this training. But equally, if you might be an organisation or in a position to help sponsor and donate towards this work, that would be absolutely fantastic to get in touch with us as well, to try and maximise how many people can really benefit from this amazing work.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Victor. I really appreciate it. Absolutely fascinating work, and it feels like it's such an exciting time to be involved in doing this that could really transform people's and communities' lives.
Yes, it is very exciting. I've done exciting things before with projects that took off. I've done projects that didn't take off, have to admit. But this one is really exciting because you do see the change very, very quickly. So I'm really looking forward to scaling it up very fast.
Brilliant. Well, very best of luck with it all. And we look forward to working more closely together in the future.
Yes, definitely.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.